Simon & Schuster Audio presents How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, read by Andrew McMillan. How this book was written and why music, during the first 35 years of the 20th century, publishing houses of America printed more than a fifth of a million different books. Most of them were deadly dull, and many were financial failures. Many did. I say the president of one of the largest publishing houses in the world confessed to me that his company, after 75 years of publishing experience, still lost money in 7 out of every 8 books it published. Why then did I have the temerity to write another book, and, after I had written it, why should you bother to read it? Fair questions both, and I'll try to answer them. I have since 1912 been conducting educational courses for business and professional men and women in New York. At first I conducted courses in public speaking, only courses designed to train adults by actual experience to think on their feet and express their ideas with more clarity, more effectiveness, and more poise, both in business interviews and before groups. But gradually, as the seasons passed, I realized thought as sorely as these adults needed training in effective speaking, they needed still more training in the fine art of getting along with people in everyday business and social contexts. I also gradually realized that I was sorely in need of such training myself. As I look back across the years, I'm appalled at my own frequent lack of finesse. Understanding how I wish a book such as this had been placed in my hands 20 years ago. What a priceless boon it would have been. Dealing with people is probably the biggest problem you face, especially if you're in business. Yes, and that is also true if you are a housewife, architect, or engineer. Research done a few years ago under the auspices of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching uncovered a most important and significant fact, a fact later confirmed by additional studies made at the Carnegie Institute of Technology. These investigations revealed that even in such technical lines as engineering, about 15% of one's financial success is due to one's technical knowledge, and about 85% is due to scale in human engineering, to personality and the ability to lead people. For many years I conducted courses each season at the Engineers Club of Philadelphia, and also courses for the New York chapter of the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. A total of probably 1,500 engineers have passed through my classes. They came to me because they had finally realized, after years of observation and experience, that the highest paid personnel in engineering are frequently not those who know the most about engineering. One can, for example, hire mere technical ability in engineering, accountancy, architecture, or any other profession at nominal salaries, but the person who has technical knowledge plus the ability to express ideas, to assume leadership and Toros enthusiasm among people, that person is headed for higher earning power. In the heyday of his activity, John D. Rockefeller said that the ability to deal with people is as purchasable a commodity as sugar or coffee, and I will pay more for that ability, said John D., than for any other under the sun. Wouldn't you suppose that every college in the land would conduct courses to develop the highest priced ability under the sun? But if there is just one practical common sense course of that kind given for adults, and even one college in the land, it has escaped my attention up to the present writing, the University of Chicago and the United YMCA schools conducted the survey to determine what adults want to study. That survey cost $25,000 and took 2 years. The last part of the survey was made in Meriden, Connecticut. It had been chosen as a typical American town. Every adult in Meriden was interviewed and requested to answer 156 questions. Questions such as: what is your business or profession, your education, how do you spend your spare time, what is your income, your hobbies, your ambitions, your problems, what subjects are you most interested in studying, and so on. That survey revealed that health is the prime interest of adults, and that their second interest is people, how to understand and get along with people, how to make people like you, and how to win others to your way of thinking. So the committee conducting this survey resolved to conduct such a course for adults in Maryland. They searched diligently for a practical textbook on the subject, and found not one. Finally, they approached one of the world's outstanding authorities on adult education, and asked him if he knew of any book that met the needs of this group. No, he replied, I know what those adults want, but the book they need has never been written. I knew from experience that this statement was true, for I myself had been searching for years to discover a practical working handbook in human relations. Since no such book existed, I have tried to write one for use in my own courses, and here it is. I hope you like it. In preparation for this book, I've read everything that I could find on the subject, everything from newspaper columns, magazine articles, records of the family courts, the Rittingsoft, the old philosophers, and the new psychologists. In addition, I hired a trained researcher to spend 1.5 years in various libraries reading everything. I had missed plowing through erudite tomes on psychology, poring over hundreds of magazine articles, searching through countless biographies, trying to ascertain how the great leaders of all ages had dealt with people. We read their biographies. We read the life stories of all great leaders, from Julius Caesar to Thomas Edison. I recall that we read over 100 biographies of Theodore Roosevelt alone. We were determined to spare no time, no expense to discover every practical idea that anyone had ever used throughout the ages for winning friends and influencing people. I personally interviewed scores of successful people, some of them world-famous inventors like Marconi and Edison, political leaders like Franklin D. Roosevelt and James Farley, business leaders like Cohen D. Young, movie stars like Clark Gable and Mary Pickford, and explorers like Martin Johnson, and tried to discover the techniques they used in human relations. From all this material, I prepared a short talk. I called it How to Win Friends and Influence People. I say short, it was short in the beginning, but it soon expanded to a lecture that consumed 1 hour and 30 minutes for years. I gave this talk each season to the adults in the Carnegie Institute courses in New York. I gave the talk and urged the listeners to go out and test it in their business and social contacts, and then come back to class and speak about their experiences and the results they'd achieved. What an interesting assignment. These men and women hungry for self-improvement were fascinated by the idea of working in a new kind of laboratory. The first and only laboratory of human relationships for adults that had ever existed. This book wasn't written in the usual sense of the word. It grew as a child grows. It grew and developed out of that laboratory, out of the experiences of thousands of adults years ago. We started with a set of rules printed on a card no larger than a postcard. Next season we printed a larger card than a leaflet, then a series of booklets, each one expanding in size and scope. After 15 years of experiment and research came this book. The rules we have set down here are not mere theories or guesswork. They work like magic. Incredible as it sounds, I have seen the application of these principles literally revolutionize the lives of many people. To illustrate, a man with 314 employees joined one of these courses. For years he had driven and criticized and condemned his employees without stint or discretion. Kindness, words of appreciation and encouragement were alien to his lips. After studying the principles discussed in this book, this employer sharply altered his philosophy of life. His organization is now inspired with a new loyalty, a new enthusiasm, a new spirit of teamwork. 314 enemies have been turned into 314 friends, as he proudly said in the speech before the class. When I used to walk through my establishment, no one greeted me. My employees actually looked the other way when they saw me approaching, but now they are all my friends, and even the janitor calls me by my first name. Theispler gained more profit, more leisure, and what is infinitely more important, he found far more happiness in his business and in his home. Countless numbers of salespeople have sharply increased their sales by the use of these principles. Many have opened up new accounts that they had formerly solicited in vain. Execut Ives have been given increased authority, increased pay. One executive reported a large increase in salary because he applied these truths. Another, an executive in the Philadelphia Gas Works Company, was slated for demotion when he was 65 because of his belligerence, because of his inability to lead people skillfully. This training not only saved him from the demotion, but brought him a promotion with increased pay. On innumerable occasions, spouses attending the banquet given at the end of the course have told me that their homes have been much happier since their husbands or wives started this training. People are frequently astonished at the new results they achieve. It all seems like magic in some cases. In their enthusiasm, they have telephoned me at my home on Sundays because they couldn't wait 48 hours to report their achievements at the regular session of the course. One man was so stirred by a talk on the set principles that he sat far into the night discussing them with other members of the class at 3 o'clock in the morning. The others went home, but he was so shaken by realization of his own mistakes, so inspired by the vista of a new and richer world opening before him, that he was unable to sleep. He didn't sleep that night or the next day or the next night. Who was he? A naive, untrained individual ready to gush over any new theory that came along? No, far from it. He was a sophisticated blasé dealer in art, very much the man about town who spoke 3 languages fluently, and was a graduate of 2 European universities. While writing this chapter, I received a letter from a German of the old school, an aristocrat whose forebears had served for generations as professional army officers under the Hohens. His letter, written from a transatlantic steamer, telling about application of these principles, rose almost to a religious fervor. Another man, an old New Yorker, a Harvard graduate, a wealthy man, the owner of a large carpet factory, declared he had learned more in 14 weeks through this system of training, the fine art of influencing people, that he had learned about the same subject during his 4 years in college. Absurd, laughable, fantastic. Of course you are privileged to dismiss this statement with whatever adjective you wish. I am merely reporting without comment a declaration made by a conservative and eminently successful Harvard graduate in a public address to approximately 600 people at the Yale Club in New York on the evening of Thursday, February 23, 1933. Compared to what we ought to be, said the famous Professor William James of Harvard, compared to what we ought to be, we are only half awake. We are making use of only a small part of our physical and mental resources. Stating the thing broadly, the human individual thus lives far within his limits. He possesses powers of various sorts, which he habitually fails to use. Those powers which you habitually fail to use. The sole purpose of this book is to help you discover, develop, and profit by those dormant and unused assets. Education, said Dr. John G. Hibben, former president of Princeton University, is the ability to meet life situations. If, by the time you have finished listening to the first 3 chapters of this book, if you aren't then a little better equipped to meet life situations, then I shall consider this book to be a total failure. So far as you are concerned, for the great aim of education, said Herbert Spencer, is not knowledge, but action. And this is an action book: How to Win Friends and Influence People. Dale Carnegie. Part 1, Fundamental Techniques in Handling People. Chapter 1, If You Want to Gather Honey, Don't Kick Over the Beehive. On May 7, 1931, the most sensational manhunt New York City had ever known had come to its climax. After weeks of search, Two-Gun Crowley, the killer, the gunman who didn't smoke or drink Wasset Bay, trapped in his sweetheart's apartment on West End Avenue. 150 policemen and detectives laid siege to his top-floor hideaway. They chopped holes in the roof. They tried to smoke out Crowley, the cop killer, with tear gas. Then they mounted their machine guns on surrounding buildings, and for more than an hour one of New York's fine residential areas reverberated with a crack of pistol fire and the rat-a-tat type of machine guns. Crowley, crouching behind an overstuffed chair, fired incessantly at the police. 10,000 excited people watched the battle, nothing like it had ever been seen before, on the sidewalks of New York, when Crowley was captured. Police Commissioner P. Mulroney declared that the two-gun desperado was one of the most dangerous criminals ever encountered in the history of New York. "Will kill," said the commissioner, at the drop of a feather. But how did two-gun Crowley regard himself when? Because while the police were firing into his apartment, he wrote a letter addressed to whom it may concern. And as he wrote, the blood flowing from his wounds left a crimson trail on the paper. In this letter Crowley said, "Under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm." A short time before this, Crowley had been having a necking party with his girlfriend on a country road out on Long Island. Suddenly, a policeman walked up to the car and said, "Let me see your license." Without saying a word, Crowley drew his gun and cut the policeman down with a shower of lead. As the dying officer fell, Crowley leaped out of the car, grabbed the officer's revolver, and fired another bullet into the prostrate body. And that was the killer who said, "Under my coat is a weary heart, kind one that would do nobody any harm." Crowley was sentenced to the electric chair when he arrived at the death house in Sing Sing. Did he say, "This is what I get for killing people"? No. He said, "This is what I get for defending myself." The point of the story is this: two-gun Crowley didn't blame himself for anything. Is that an unusual attitude among criminals? If you think so, listen to this. "I have spent the best years of my life giving people lighter pleasures, helping them have a good time, and all I get is abuse." The existence of a haunted man. That's Al Capone speaking. Yes, America's most notorious public enemy, the most sinister gang leader who ever shot up Chicago. Capone didn't condemn himself. He actually regarded himself as a public benefactor, an unappreciated and misunderstood public benefactor. And so did Dutch Schultz before he crumpled up under gangster bullets in Newark. Dutch Schultz, one of New York's most notorious rats, said in a newspaper interview that he was a public benefactor, and he believed it. "I've had some interesting correspondence with Lewis Laws, who was warden of New York's infamous Sing Sing prison for many years, on this subject. And he declared that few of the criminals in Sing Sing regard themselves as bad men. They are just as human as you and I, so they rationalize, they explain, they can tell you why they had to crack a safe or be quick on the trigger finger. Most of them attempt by a form of reasoning, fallacious or logical, to justify their antisocial acts even to themselves, consequently stoutly maintaining that they should never have been imprisoned at all." If Al Capone, two-gun Crowley, Dutch Schultz, and the desperate men and women behind prison walls don't blame themselves for anything, what about the people with whom you and I come in contact? John Wanamaker, founder of the stores that bear his name, once confessed, "I learned 30 years ago that it is foolish to scold. I have enough trouble overcoming my own limitations without fretting over the fact that God has not seen fit to distribute evenly the gift of intelligence." Wanamaker learned this lesson early. "But I personally had to blunder through this old world for a third of a century before it even began to dawn upon me that 99 times out of 100 people don't criticize themselves for anything, no matter how wrong it may be. Criticism is futile because it puts a person on the defensive and usually makes him strive to justify himself. Criticism is dangerous because it wounds a person's precious pride, hurts his sense of importance, and arouses resentment." B.F. Skinner, the world-famous psychologist, proved through his experiments that an animal rewarded for good behavior will learn much more rapidly and retain what it learns far more effectively than an animal punished for bad behavior. Later studies have shown that the same applies to humans. By criticizing, we do not make lasting changes, and often incur resentment. Hans Selye and other great psychologists said as much as we thirst for approval, we dread condemnation. The resentment that criticism engenders can demoralize employees, family members, and friends, and still not correct the situation that has been condemned. George B. Johnston of Enid, Oklahoma, is safety coordinator for an engineering company. One of his responsibilities is to see that employees wear their hard hats whenever they are on a job in the field. He reported that whenever he came across workers who were not wearing hard hats, he would tell them with a lot of authority of the regulation and that they must comply. As a result, he would get sullen acceptance, and often after he left, the workers would remove the hats. He decided to try a different approach. The next time he found some of the workers not wearing their hard hat, he asked if the hats were uncomfortable or didn't fit properly. Then he reminded men in a pleasant tone of voice that the hat was designed to protect them from injury, and suggested that it always be worn on the job. The result was increased compliance with the regulation with no resentment or emotional upset. You will find examples of the futility of criticism bristling on 1,000 pages of history. Take, for example, the famous quarrel between Theodore Roosevelt and President Taft, a quarrel that split the Republican Party, put Woodrow Wilson in the White House, and wrote bold, luminous lines across the First World War and altered the flow of history. Now let's review the facts quickly. When Theodore Roosevelt stepped out of the White House in 1908, he supported Taft, who was-elected president. Then Theodore Roosevelt went off to Africa to shoot lions. When he returned, he exploded. He denounced Taft for his conservatism, tried to secure the nomination for a third term, himself formed the Bull Moose Party, and all but demolished the GOP. In the election that followed, William Howard Taft and the Republican Party carried only 2 states, Vermont and Utah. The most disastrous defeat the party had ever known. Theodore Roosevelt blamed Taft, but did President Taft blame himself? Of course not. With tears in his eyes, Taft said, "I don't see how I could have done any differently from what I have." Who was to blame, Roosevelt or Taft? Frankly, I don't know, and I don't care. The point I'm trying to make is that all of Theodore Roosevelt's criticism didn't persuade Taft that he was wrong. It merely made Taft strive to justify himself, and to reiterate with tears in his eyes, "I don't see How I could have done any different from what I have or take the Teapot Dome oil scandal. It kept the newspapers ringing with indignation in the early 1920s. It rocked the nation within the memory of living men. Nothing like it had ever happened before in American public life. I hear the bare facts of the scandal. Albert B. Fall, Secretary of the Interior in Harding's cabinet, was entrusted with the leasing of government oil reserves at Elk Hill and Teapot Dome oil reserves that had been set aside for the future of the Navy. Did Secretary Fall permit competitive bidding? No, sir. He handed the fat, juicy contract outright to his friend Edward L. Doheny. What did Doheny do? He gave Secretary Fall what he was pleased to call a loan of $100,000. And then in a high-handed manner Secretary Fall ordered United States Marines into the district to drive off competitors whose adjacent wells were sapping oil out of the Elk Hill reserves. These competitors, driven off their ground at ends of guns and bayonets, rushed into court and blew the lid off the Teapot Dome scandal. A stench rose so vile that it ruined the Harding administration, nauseated an entire nation, threatened to wreck the Republican Party, put Albert B. Fall behind prison bars. Fall was condemned, viciously condemned, as few men in public life have ever been. Did he repent? Never. Years later, Herbert Hoover intimated in a public speech that President Harding's death had been due to mental anxiety and worry because a friend had betrayed him. When Mrs. Fall heard that, she sprang from her chair. She wept, she shook her fists at fate, and screamed, "What, Harding betrayed by Fall? No, my husband never betrayed anyone. This whole house full of gold would not tempt my husband to do wrong. He's the one who has been betrayed, handled to the slaughter, and crucified. And there you are, human nature in action. Wrongdoers blaming everybody but themselves. We're all like that. So when you and I are tempted to criticize someone tomorrow, let's remember Al Capone, Two Gun Crowley, and Albert Fall. Let's realize that criticisms are like homing pigeons. They always return home. Let's realize that the person we're going to correct and condemn will probably justify himself or herself and condemn us in return, or like the gentle Taft will say, I don't see how I could have done any differently." From what I have forn on the morning of April 150, 1865, Abraham Lincoln lay dying in a hall bedroom of a cheap lodging house directly across the street from Ford's Theater, where John Wilkes Booth had shot him. Lincoln's long body lay stretched diagonally across a sagging bed that was too short for him. A cheap reproduction of Rosa Bonheur's famous painting The Horse Fair hung above the bed, and a dismal gas jet flickered yellow light as Lincoln lay dying. Secretary of War Stanton said, "There lies the most perfect ruler of men that the world has ever seen." What was the secret of Lincoln's success in dealing with people? I studied the life of Abraham Lincoln for 10 years and devoted all of 3 years to writing and rewriting a book entitled Lincoln Thunone. I believe I have made as detailed and exhaustive a study of Lincoln's personality and home life as it is possible for any being to make. I made a special study of Lincoln's method of dealing with people. Did he indulge in criticism? Oh yes. As a young man in the Pigeon Creek Valley of Indiana, he not only criticized, but he wrote letters and poems ridiculing people, and dropped these letters on the country roads, where they were sure to be found. One of these letters aroused resentments that burned for a lifetime, even after Lincoln had become a practicing lawyer in Springfield, Illinois. He attacked his opponents openly in letters published in the newspapers, but he did this just once too often. In the autumn of 1842, he ridiculed a vain, pugnacious politician by the name of James Shields. Lincoln lampooned him through an anonymous letter published in the Springfield Journal. The town roared with laughter, chilled, sensitive, and proud, boiled with indignation. He found out who wrote the letter, leapt on his horse, started after Lincoln, and challenged him to fight a duel. Lincoln didn't want to fight. He was opposed to dueling, but he couldn't get out of it. And save his honor, he was given the choice of weapons. Since he had very long arms, he chose cavalry broadswords and took lessons in sword fighting from a West Point graduate. And on the appointed day, he and Shields met on a sandbar in the Mississippi River, prepared to fight to the death. But at the last minute, their seconds interrupted and stopped the duel. And that was most lurid personal incident in Lincoln's life. It taught him an invaluable lesson in the art of dealing with people. Never again did he write an insulting letter. Never again did he ridicule anyone, and from that time on he almost never criticized anybody for anything. Time after time during the Civil War, Lincoln put a new general at the head of the Army of the Potomac, and each one in turn, McClellan, Pope, Burnside, Hooker, Meade, blundered tragically and drove Lincoln to pacing the floor in despair. Half the nation savagely condemned these incompetent generals, but Lincoln, with malice toward none and charity for all, held his peace. One of his favorite quotations was, "Judge not that ye be not judged." And when Mrs. Lincoln and others spoke harshly of the Southern people, Lincoln replied, "Don't criticize them, they are just what we would be under similar circumstances. Yet if any man ever had occasion to criticize, surely it was Lincoln." Let's take just one illustration. The Battle of Gettysburg was fought during the first 3 days of July 1863. During the night of July 4th, Lee began to retreat southward, while storm clouds deluged the country with rain. When Lee reached the Potomac with his defeated army, he found a swollen, impassable river in front of him, and a victorious Union army behind him. Lee was in a trap he couldn't escape. Lincoln saw that here was a golden, heaven-sent opportunity, the opportunity to capture Lee's army and end the war immediately. So, with a surge of high hope, Lincoln ordered Meade not to call a council of war. Attack Lee immediately. Lincoln telegraphed his orders, and then sent a special messenger to Meade demanding immediate action. And what did General Meade do? He did the very opposite of what he was told to do. Heckled a council of war in direct violation of Lincoln's orders. He hesitated, he procrastinated, telegraphed all manner of excuses, he refused point blank to attack Lee. Finally, the waters receded, and Lee escaped over the Potomac with his forces. Lincoln was furious. What does this mean? Lincoln, cried Tohei's son Robert, great God, what does this mean? We had them within our grasp, and had only to stretch forth our hands, and they were ours, yet nothing that I could say or do could make the army move under the circumstances. Almost any general could have defeated Lee if I had gone up there. I could have whipped him myself. In bitter disappointment, Lincoln sat down and wrote me this letter. And remember, at this period of his life Lincoln was extremely conservative and restrained in his phraseology. So this letter, coming from Lincoln in 1863, was tantamount to the severest rebuke. My dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. He was within our easy grasp, and to have closed upon him would, in connection with our other late successes, have ended Thuor, as it is. War will be prolonged indefinitely. If you could not safely attack Lee last Monday, how can you possibly do so south of the river, when you can take with you very few, no more than 2/3 of the force you then had in hand? It would be unreasonable to expect, and I do not expect that you can no effect much. Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it. And what do you suppose me did? When he read the letter, Meade never saw that letter. Lincoln never mailed it. It was found among his papers after his death. My guess is, and this is only a guess, that after writing that letter Lincoln looked it out of the window, and said to himself, just a minute, maybe I ought not be so hasty. It is easy enough for me to sit here in the quiet of the White House and order me to attack, but if I had been up at Gettysburg, and if I had seen as much blood as Meade had seen during the last week, and if my ears had been pierced with the screams and the shrieks of the wounded and dying, maybe I wouldn't have been so anxious to attack either. If I had Meade's timid temperament, perhaps I would have done just what had done. Anyhow, it is water under the bridge now. If I send this letter, it will relieve my feelings, but it will make Meade try to justify himself. It will make him condemn me. It will arouse hard feelings, impair all High's further usefulness as a commander, and perhaps force him to resign from the army. So, as I've already said, Lincoln put the letter aside, for he'd learned by better experience than sharp criticisms and rebukes almost invariably end in futility. Theodore Roosevelt said that when he as president was confronted with a perplexing problem, he used to lean back and look up at a large painting of Lincoln which hung above his desk in the White House, and asked himself, what would Lincoln do? If he were in me shoes, how would he solve this problem? The next time we're tempted to admonish somebody, let's pull a $5 bill out of our pocket, look at Lincoln's picture on the bill, and ask how would Lincoln handle this problem if he had it. Mark Twain lost his temper occasionally, and wrote letters that in the paper brown. For example, he once wrote to a man who darest desire the thing for you is a burial permit, you have only to speak, and I will see that you get it. On another occasion he wrote to Editor about a proofreader's attempts to improve my spelling and punctuation. He ordered set themeter according to my copy hereafter, and see that the proofreader retains his suggestions. In the mush of his decayed brain, the writing of these stinging letters made Mark Twain feel better. They allowed him to blow off steam, and the letters didn't do any real harm because Mark's wife secretly lifted them out of the mail, and they were never sent. Do you know someone you'd like to change and regulate and improve? Good, that's fine, I'm all in favor of it, but why not begin on yourself from a purely selfish standpoint? That's a lot more profitable than try improve others. Yes, and a lot less dangerous. Don't complain about the snow on your neighbor's roof, said Confucius, when your own doorstep is unclean. When I was still young and trying hard to impress people, I wrote a foolish letter to Richard Harding Davis, an author who once loomed large on the literary horizon of America. I was preparing a magazine article about authors. I asked Davis to tell me about his method of work. A few weeks earlier I'd received a letter from someone with this notation at the bottom, dictated but not read. It was quite impressed. I felt that the writer must be very big and busy and important. I wasn't the slightest bit busy, but I was eager to make an impression on Richard Harding Davis, so I ended my short note with words dictated but not read. He never troubled to answer the letter. He simply returned it to me with thighs scribbled across the bottom. Your bad manners are exceeded only by your bad manners. True, I had blundered, and perhaps I deserve this rebuke, but being human, I resented it. I resented it so sharply that when I read at the death of Richard Harding Davis 10 years later, the one thought that still persisted in my mind, I'm ashamed to admit, was the hurt that he had given me. If you and I want to stir up a resentment tomorrow that may wrinkle across the decades and endure until death, just let us indulge in the little stinging criticism, no matter how certain we are that it is justified when dealing with people. Let us remember we are not dealing with creatures of logic. We are dealing with creatures of motion, creatures bristling with prejudices and motivated by pride and vanity. Bitter criticism caused the sensitive Thomas Hardy, one of the finest novelists ever to enrich English literature, to give up forever the writing of fiction. Criticism drove Thomas Chatterton, the English poet, to suicide. Benjamin Franklin, tactless in his youth, became so diplomatic, so adroit at handling people, that he was made American ambassador to France. The secret of his success: I will speak ill of no man, he said, and speak all the good in of everybody. Any fool can criticize, condemn, and complain, and most fools do, but it takes character and self-control to understanding and forgiving. A great man shows his greatness, said Carlyle, by the way he treats Littleman. Bob Hoover, a famous test pilot and frequent performer at air shows, was returning to his home in Los Angeles from an air show in San Diego. As described in the magazine Flight Operations, at 300 feet in the air, both engines suddenly stopped by deft maneuvering. He managed to land the plane, but it was badly damaged. Although nobody was hurt, Hoover's first act after the emergency landing was to inspect the airplane's fuel, just as he suspected. The World War II propeller plane he'd been flying had been fueled with jet fuel rather than gasoline. Upon returning to the airport, he asked to see the mechanic who had serviced his airplane. The young man was sick with the agony of his mistake. Tears streamed down his face as Hoover approached. He had just caused the loss of a very expensive plane, and could have caused the loss of 3 lives as well. You can imagine Hoover's anger. One could anticipate a tongue lashing at this proud and precise pilot would unleash for that carelessness. But Hoover didn't call the mechanic. He didn't even criticize him. Instead, he put his big arm around the man's shoulder and said, "To show you I'm sure that you'll never do this again, I want you to service my F-51 tomorrow." Often parents are tempted to criticize their children. You would expect me to say don't. But I will not. I am merely going to say before you criticize them. Read one of the classics of American journalism, Father Forgets. It originally appeared as an editorial in the People's Home Journal. Here it is with the author's permission as condensed in the Reader's Digest. A Father Forgets is one of those little pieces which dashed off in a moment of sincerefilling strikes an echoing chord in so many readers as to become a perennial reprint favorite since its first appearance. Father Forgets has been reproduced, writes the author W. Livingston. Learn it in hundreds of magazines and house organs, and in newspapers all over the country. It has been reprinted almost as extensively in many foreign languages. I have given personal permission to thousands who wish to read it from school, church, and lecture platforms. It has been on the air on countless occasions and programs. Oddly enough, college periodicals have used it, and high school magazines. Sometimes a little piece seems mysteriously to click. This one certainly did. Father Forgets by W. Livingston. Larn, listen, son, I'm saying this as you lie asleep, one little paw curled under your cheek, and the blonde curls tickly wet on your damp forehead. I have stolen into your room alone just a few minutes ago as I sat reading my paper in the library. A stifling wave of remorse swept over me. Guiltily, I came to your bedside. These are the things I was thinking, son. I had been cross to you. I scolded you as you were dressing for school, because you gave your face merely a dab with a towel. I took you to task for not cleaning your shoes. I called out angrily when you threw some of your things on the floor at breakfast. I found fault too. You spilled things. You gulped down your food. You put your elbows on the table. You spread butter too thick on your bread. And as Yao started off the play, and I made for my train, you turned and waved a hand and called, "Goodbye, Daddy," and I frowned and said in reply, "Hold your shoulders back." Then it began all over again in the late afternoon. As I came up the road, I spied you down on your knees playing marbles. There were holes in your stockings. I humiliated Yao before your boyfriends by marching you ahead of me to the house. Stockings were expensive, and if Yao had to buy them, you'd be more careful. Imagine that, son, from a father. Do you remember later, when I was reading in the library, how you came in timidly with a sort of hurt look in your eyes when I glanced up over my paper, impatient at the interruption? You hesitated at the door. "What is it you want?" I snapped at you. Said nothing, but ran the cross in one tempestuous plunge, and threw your arms around my neck and kissed me, and your small arms, tightened with an affection that God had set blooming in your heart, and which even neglect could not wither. And then you were gone, pattering up the stairs. Well, son, it was shortly afterwards that my paper slipped from my hands in a terrible, sickening fear came over me. What Hashabit been doing to me? The habit of finding fault, of reprimanding. This was my reward to you for being a boy. It was not that I did not love you. It was that I expected too much of youth. I was measuring you by the yardstick of my own years, and there was so much that was good and fine and true in your character. The little heart off you was as big as the dawn itself over the wide hills. This was shown by your spontaneous impulse to rush in and kiss me good night. Nothing else matters tonight, son. I have come to your bedside in the darkness, and I have knelt there ashamed. It is a feeble atonement. I know you would not understand these things if I told them to you during your waking hours. But tomorrow I will be a real daddy. I will chum with you and suffer when you suffer and laugh when you laugh. I will bite my tongue when impatient words come. I will keep saying as if it were a ritual, he is nothing but a boy, a little boy. I am afraid I have visualized you as a man, yet as I see you now, son, crumpled and weary in your cot, I see that you were still a baby. Yesterday you were in your mother's arms, your head on her shoulder. I have asked too much. Instead of condemning people, let's try to understand them. Let's try to figure out why they do what they do. That's a lot more profitable and intriguing than criticism, and it breeds sympathy, tolerance, and kindness. To know all is to forgive all. As Dr. Johnson said, God himself, sir, does not propose to judge man until the end of his days. Why should you and I? Principle 1, don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Chapter 2, the big secret of dealing with people. There's only one way under high heaven to get anybody to do anything. Did you ever stop to think of that? Yes, just one way, and that is by making the other person want to do it. Remember, there is no other way. Of course, you can make someone want to give you his watch by sticking a revolver in his ribs. He can make your employees give you cooperation until your back is turned by threatening to fire them. You can make a child do what you want it to do by a whip or a threat. But these crude methods have sharply undesirable repercussions. The only way I can get you to do anything is by giving you what you want. What do you want? Sigmund Freud said that everything you want I do springs from two motives: the sex urge and the desire to be great. John Dewey, one of America's most profound philosophers, phrased it a bit differently. Dr. Dewey's deepest urge in human nature is the desire to be important. Remember that phrase, the desire to be important. It is significant. You're going to hear a lot about it in this book. And what do you want? Well, not many things, but the few things that you do wish, you crave with an insistence that will not be denied. Some of the things most people want include health and the preservation of life, food, sleep, money, and the things money will buy, life in the hereafter, sexual gratification, the well-being of our children, a feeling of importance. Almost all of the suants are usually gratified, all except one. But there's one longing almost as deep, almost as imperious as desire for food or sleep, which is seldom gratified. It is what Freud calls the desire to be great. It is what Dewey calls the desire to be important. Lincoln once began a letter saying everybody likes a compliment. William James said the deepest principle in human nature is the craving to be appreciated. He didn't speak, mind you, of the wish or the desire or the longing to be appreciated. Hess said the craving to be appreciated here is annoying and unfaltering human hunger, and the rare individual who honestly satisfies this heart hunger will hold people in the palm of his or her hand, and even the undertaker will be sorry when he dies. The desire for a feeling of importance is one of the chief distinguishing differences between mankind and the animals. To illustrate, when I was a farm boy out in Missouri, my father bred fine Duroc Jersey hogs and pedigreed white-faced cattle. We used to exhibit our hogs and white-faced cattle at the county fairs and livestock shows throughout the Middle West. We won first prizes by the score. My father pinned his blue ribbons on a sheet of white muslin, and when friends or visitors came to the house, he'd get out the long sheet of muslin. He'd hold one end, and I would hold the other while he exhibited the blue ribbons. And the hogs didn't care about the ribbons, they had won, but father did. These prizes gave him a feeling of importance. If our ancestors hadn't had this flaming urge for a feeling of importance, civilizations would have been impossible without it. We should have been just about like animals. It was this desire for a feeling of importance that led an uneducated, poverty-stricken grocery clerk to study some law books he found on the bottom of a barrel of household plunder that he had bought for 50 cents. You've probably heard of this grocery clerk. His name was Lincoln. It was this desire for a feeling of importance that inspired Dickens to write his immortal novels. This desire inspired Sir Christopher Wren to design his symphonies in stone. This desire made Rockefeller amass millions that he never spent, and this same desire made the richest family in your town build a house far too large for its requirements. This desire makes you want to wear the latest styles, try the latest cars, and talk about your brilliant children. It is this desire that lures many boys and girls into joining gangs and engaging in criminal activities. The average young criminal, according to E.P. Mulroney, one-time police commissioner of New York, is filled with ego, and his first request after arrest is for those lurid newspapers that make him out a hero. The disagreeable prospect of serving time seems remote so long as he can gloat over his likeness sharing space with pictures of sports figures, movie and TV stars, and politicians. If you tell me how you get your feeling of importance, I'll tell you what you are that determines your character. This is the most significant thing about you. For example, John D. Rockefeller got his feeling of importance by giving money to erect a modern hospital in Peking, China, to care for millions of poor people whom he had never seen and never would see. Dillinger, on the other hand, got his feeling of importance by being abandoned, a bank robber and a killer when the FBI agents were hunting him. Had Ash into a farmhouse up in Minnesota and said, "I'm Dillinger." He was proud of the fact that he was public enemy number one. "I'm not going to hurt you, but I'm Dillinger," he said. Yes, the one significant difference between Dillinger and Rockefeller is how they got their feeling of importance. History sparkles with amusing examples of famous people struggling for a feeling of importance. Even George Washington wanted to be called His Mightiness the President of the United States, and Columbus pleaded for the title Admiral of the Ocean, and Viceroy of India. Catherine the Great refused to open letters that were not addressed to Her Imperial Majesty, and Mrs. Lincoln in the White House turned upon Mrs. Grant like a tigress and shouted, "How dare you be seated in my presence until I invite you?" Our millionaires helped finance Admiral Byad's expedition to the Antarctic in 1928, with the understanding that ranges of ice mountains would be named after them. And Victor Hugo aspired to have nothing less than the city of Paris renamed in his honor. Even Shakespeare, mightiest of the mighty, tried to add luster to his name by procuring a coat of arms for his family. Thank you, music. People sometimes become invalids in order to own sympathy and attention, and get a feeling of importance. For example, take Mrs. McKinley. She got a feeling of importance by forcing her husband, the President of the United States, to neglect important affairs of state, while he reclined on the bed beside her for hours at a time, his arm about her, soothing her to sleep. She fed her knowing desire for attention by insisting that he remained with her while she was having her teeth fixed, and once created a stormy scene when he had to leave her alone with the dentist, while he kept an appointment with John Hay, his Secretary of State. The right Mary Roberts Reinhardt once told me of a bright, vigorous young woman who became an invalid in order to get a feeling of importance. One day, said Mrs. Reinhardt, this woman had been obliged to face something her age, perhaps the lonely years were stretching ahead, and there was little left for her to anticipate. She took to her bed, and for 10 years her old mother traveled to the third floor and back carrying trays, nursing her. Then one day the old mother, weary with service, lay down and died. For some weeks the invalid languished, then she got up, put on her clothing, and resumed living again. And some authorities declare that people may actually go insane in order to find in the dreamland of insanity the feeling of importance that has been denied. Theme: in the harsh world of reality, there are more patients suffering from mental diseases in the United States than from all other diseases combined. What is the cause of insanity? Nobody can answer such a sweeping question, but we know that certain diseases such as syphilis break down and destroy the brain cells and result in insanity. In fact, about 1/2 of all mental diseases can be attributed to such physical causes as brain lesions, alcohol, toxins, and injuries. But the other half, and this is the appalling part of the story, the other half of the people who go insane apparently have nothing organically wrong with their brain cells in postmortem examinations. When their brain tissues are studied under THEIS-powered microscopes, these tissues are found to be apparently just as healthy as yours and mine. Why do these people go insane? I put that question to the head physician at one of our most important psychiatric hospitals. This doctor, who's received the highest honors and the most coveted awards for his knowledge of this subject, told me frankly that he didn't know why people went insane. Nobody knows for sure, but he did say many people who go insane find in insanity a feeling of importance that they were unable to achieve in the world of reality. And then he told me this story. I have a patient right now whose marriage proved to be a tragedy. She wanted love, sexual gratification, children, social prestige. But life blasted all her hopes. Her husband didn't love her. He refused even to eat with her and forced her to serve his meals in his room upstairs. She had no children, no social standing. She went insane. And in her imagination, she divorced her husband and resumed her maiden name. She now believes she had married into English aristocracy, and she insists on being called Lady Smith. And as per children, she imagines that she has a new child every night. Each time I call on her, she says, "Doctor, I had a baby last night." Life once wrecked all her dream ships on the sharp rocks of reality. But in the sunny fantasy isles of insanity, all her bargantines race in topward with canvas billowing and winds singing through the masts. Tragic. Oh, I don't know. Her physician said to me if I could stretch out my hand and restore her sanity, I wouldn't do it. She's much happier. As is if some people are so hungry for a feeling of importance that they actually go insane to get it. Imagine what miracle you and I can achieve by giving people honest appreciation this side of insanity. One of the first people in American business to be paid a salary of over $1 million a year, when there was no income tax, and a person earning $50 a week was considered well off, was Charles Schwab. He had been picked by Andrew Carnegie to become the first president of the newly formed United States Steel Company in 1921, when Schwab was only 38 years old. Schwab later left U.S. Steel to take over the then troubled Bethlehem Steel Company, and he rebuilt it into one of the most profitable companies in America. Why did Andrew Carnegie pay $1 million a year, or more than $3,000 a day, to Charles Schwab? Because Schwab was a genius? No, because he knew more about the manufacture of steel than other people. Nonsense. Charles Schwab told me himself that he had many men working for him. Hawk knew more about the manufacture of steel than he did. Schwab says that he was paid this salary largely because of his ability to deal with people. I asked him how he did it. Here is his secret, set down in his own words that ought to be cast in eternal bronze and hung in every home and school, every shop and office in the land. Words that children ought to memorize, instead of wasting their time memorizing the conjugation of Latin verbs or the amount of annual rainfall in Brazil. Words that will all but transform your life and mine, if we will only live by them. I consider my ability to arouse enthusiasm among my people, said Schwab, the greatest asset that I possess, and the way to develop the best that is in a person is by appreciation and encouragement. There is nothing else that so kills the ambition of a person as criticism from superiors. I never criticize anyone. I believe in giving a person incentive to work, so I'm anxious to praise, but loath to find fault. If I like anything, I am hearty in my approbation and lavish in my praise. And that is what Schwab did. But what do average people do? The exact opposite. If they don't like a thing, they bawl out their subordinates. If they do like it, they say nothing. As the old couplet says, once I did bad, and that I heard of her twice I did good, but that I heard never in my wide association in life, meeting with many and great people in various parts of the world. Schwab declared, I get to find the person, however great or exalted his station, who did not do better work and put forth greater effort under aspirate of approval than he would ever do under a spirit of criticism. That, he said frankly, was one of the outstanding reasons for the phenomenal success of Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie praised his associates publicly as well as privately. Carnegie wanted to praise his assistants. Even on his tombstone he wrote an epitaph for himself, which dread here lies one who knew how to get around him men who were cleverer than himself. Sincere appreciation was one of the secrets of the first John D. Rockefeller's success in handling men. For example, when one of his partners, Edward T. Bedford, lost $1 million for the firm be a bad buy in South America, John D. might have criticized, but he knew Bedford had done his best and the incident was closed. So Rockefeller found something to praise. He congratulated Bedford because it been able to save 60% of the money he'd invested. That splendid, said Rockefeller. We don't always do as well as that. Upstairs I have among my clippings a story that I know never happened, but it illustrates a truth, so I'll repeat it. According to this silly story, a farm woman at the end of a heavy day's work set before her men folks a heaping pile of hay, and when they indignantly demanded whether she'd gone a crazy, she replied, well, how did I know you'd notice? I've been cooking for you men for the last 20 years, and in all that time I ain't heard no word to let me know you wasn't just eating hay. And when the study was made a few years ago on runaway wives, what do you think was discovered to be the main reason wives ran away? It was lack of appreciation. And I bet that a similar study made of runaway husbands would come out the same way. We often take our spouses so much for granted that we never let them know we appreciate them. A member of one of our classes told of a request made by his wife-ish, and a group of other women in her church were involved in the self-improvement program. She asked her husband to help her by listing 6 things he believed she could do better. Wife here reported to the class, I was surprised by such a request. Frankly, it would have been easy for me to list 6 things I would like to change about her. My heaven, she could have listed 1,000 things you'd like to change about me. But I didn't. I said to her, let me think about it and give you an answer in the morning. Next morning, I got up very early and called the florist. and had them send 6 red roses to my wife with a note saying, "I can't think of 6 things I would like to change about. Love you the way you are." When I arrived at home that evening, who do you think greeted me at the door? That's right, my wife. She was almost in tears. Needless to say, I was extremely glad I had not criticized her, as she requested the following Sunday at church. After she reported the results of her assignment, several women with whom she'd been studying came up to me and said that was the most considerate thing I've ever heard. It was then that I realized the power of appreciation. Florence Ziegfeld, the most spectacular producer who ever dazzled. Broadway gained his reputation by his subtle ability to glorify the American girl time after time, head-up-gram little creatures that no one ever looked at twice, and transformed them on the stage into glamorous visions of mystery and seduction. And knowing the value of appreciation and confidence made women feel beautiful by the sheer power of his gallantry and consideration. He was practical. He raised the salary of chorus girls from $30 a week to as high as $175. He was also chivalrous. On opening night at the Follies, he sent telegrams to the stars and the cast, and he deluged every chorus girl on Thesha with American Beauty roses. I once succumbed to the fad of fasting and went for 6 days and nights without eating. It wasn't difficult. I was less hungry at the end of the 6th day than I was at the end of the 2nd. Yet I know, as you know, people who would think they'd committed a crime if they let their families or employees go for 6 days without food, but they will let them go for 6 days and 6 weeks, and sometimes 60 years without giving them the hearty appreciation that they crave almost as much as they crave food. When Alfred Lunt, one of the great actors of his time, played the leading role in Reunion in Vienna, he said, "There is nothing I need so much as nourishment for my self-esteem." We nourish the bodies of our children and friends and employees, but how seldom nourish their self-esteem. We provide them with roast beef and potatoes to build energy, but when to give them kind words of appreciation that would sing in their memories for years, like the music of the Morning Stars. Paul Harvey, in one of his radio broadcasts, the rest of the story told how showing sincere appreciation can change a person's life. He reported that years ago a teacher in Detroit asked Stevie Morris to help her find a mouse that was lost in the classroom. You see, she appreciated the fact that nature had given Stevie something no one else in the room had. Nature had given Stevie a remarkable pair of ears to compensate for his blind eyes, but this was really the first time Stevie had been shown appreciation for those talented years. Now, years later, he says that this act of appreciation was the beginning of a new life. You see, from that time on, he developed his gift of hearing and went on to come under the stage name of Stevie Wonder, one of the great pop singers and songwriters of the 70s. Some of you are saying right now, as you hear these words, "Oh, fully flattery, bear oil, I've tried that stuff, it doesn't work." Not with intelligent people, of course. Pottery seldom works with discerning people. It is shallow, selfish, and insincere. It ought to fail, and it usually does. True, some people are so hungry, so thirsty for appreciation that they'll swallow anything, just as a starving man will eat grass and fishworms. Even Queen Victoria was susceptible to flattery. Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli confessed they'd put it on thick in dealing with the Queen. To use his exact words, he said, "Spread it on with a trowel." But Disraeli was one of the most polished, daft, and adroit men who ever ruled the far-flung British Empire. Hugh is a genius in his line. What would work for him wouldn't necessarily work for you and me in the long run. Flattery will do you more harm than good. Flattery is counterfeit, and like counterfeit money, it will eventually get you into trouble if you pass it to someone else. The difference between appreciation and flattery: that simple one is sincere, the other is insincere. One comes from the heart out, the other from teeth out. One is unselfish, the other selfish. One is universally admired, the other universally condemned. I recently saw a bust of Mexican hero General Alvaro Obregón in the Chapultepec Palace in Mexico City. Below the buster carved these wise words from General Obregón's philosophy: "Don't be afraid of enemies who attack you, be afraid of the friends who flatter you." No, I'm not suggesting flattery, far from it. I'm talking about a new way of life. Let me repeat, I am talking about a new way of life. King George V had a set of 6 maxims displayed on the walls of his study in Buckingham Palace. One of these maxims said, "Teach me neither to proffer nor receive cheap praise." And that's all. Flattery is cheap praise. I once read a definition of flattery that may be worth repeating. Flattery is telling the other person precisely what he thinks about himself. Use what language you will, said Ralph Waldo Emerson. You can never say anything but what you are. If all we had to do was flatter, everybody would catch on. And we should all be experts in human relations. When we are not engaged in thinking about some definite problem, we usually spend about 95% of our time thinking about ourselves. No, if we stop thinking about ourselves for a while and begin to think of the other person's good points, we won't have to resort to flattery so cheap and false that it can be spotted almost before it's out of the mouth. One of the most neglected virtues of our daily existence is appreciation. Somehow we neglect to praise our son or daughter when he or she brings home a good report card, and we fail to encourage our children when they first succeed in baking a cake or building a birdhouse. Nothing pleases children more than this kind of parental interest and approval. And the next time you enjoy filet mignon at the club, send word to the chef that it was excellently prepared. And when a tired salesperson shows you unusual courtesy, please mention Ivory. Minister, lecturer, and public speaker knows the discouragement of pouring himself or herself out to an audience and not receiving a single ripple of appreciative comment. What applies to professionals applies AA to workers in offices, shops, and factories, and our families and friends in our interpersonal relations. We should never forget that all our associates are human beings and hunger for Appreciation it is the legal tender that all souls enjoy. Try leaving a friendly trail of little sparks of gratitude on your daily trips. You will be surprised how they will set small flames of friendship that will be rose beacons on your. Next, visit Pamela Dunham of New Fairfield, Connecticut. Had among her responsibilities on her job the supervision of a janitor who was doing a very poor job. The other employees would jeer at him and litter the hallways to show him what a bad job he was doing. It was so bad. Productive time was being lost in the shop without success. Pam tried various ways to motivate this person she noticed that occasionally headed a particularly good piece of work. She made a point to praise him for it in front of the other people. Each day the job he did all around got better pretty soon. He started doing all his work efficiently. Now he does an excellent job. And other people give him appreciation and recognition. Honest appreciation got results where criticism and ridicule failed, hurting. People not only does not change them, it is never called for. There's an old saying that I have cut out and pasted on my mirror where I cannot help but see it every day. I shall pass this way. But once any good therefore that I can do or any kindness that I can show to any human being, let me do it now. Let me not defer nor neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again. Emerson said every man I meet is my superior in some way and that I learn of him. If that was true of Emerson, isn't it likely to be 1,000 times more true of you and me? Let's cease thinking offer accomplishments our wants. Let's try to figure out the other person's good points. Then forget flattery. Give honest, sincere appreciation. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. And people will cherish your words and treasure them, and repeat them over a lifetime. Repeat them years after you have forgotten them. Principle 2. Give honest, sincere appreciation. Chapter 3. He who can do this has the whole world with him. He who can walks a lonely way. I often went fishing up in Maine during summer, and personally, I'm very fond of strawberries and cream. But I found that for some strange reason fish prefer worms, so when I went fishing, I didn't think about what I wanted, I thought about what they wanted. I didn't bait the hook with strawberries and cream, rather I dangled a worm or grasshopper in front of the fish and said, wouldn't you like to have that? Why not use the same common sense when fishing for people? That is what Lloyd George, Great Britain's Prime Minister during World War I, did when someone asked him how he managed to stay in power after the other wartime leaders, Wilson, Orlando and Clemens, had been forgot. He replied that if his staying on top might be attributed to any one thing, it would be to his having learned that it was necessary to bait the hook, toss out the fish. Why talk about what we want? That's childish, absurd. Of course you're interested in what you want, you're eternally interested in it, but no one else is. The rest of us are just like you. We are interested in what we want, so the only way on earth to influence other people is to talk about what they want and show them how to get it. Remember that tomorrow when you're trying to get somebody to do something. If, for example, you don't want your children to smoke, don't preach at theme end. Don't talk about what you want, but show them that cigarettes may keep them from making the basketball team or winning the 100-yard dash. This is a good thing to remember regardless of whether you are dealing with children or calves or chimpanzees. For example, one day Ralph Waldo Emerson and his son tried to get a calf into the barn. They made the common mistake of thinking only of what they wanted. Emerson pushed, and his son pulled, but the calf was doing just what they were doing. He was thinking only of what he wanted, so he stiffened his legs and stubbornly refused to leave the pasture. The Irish housemaid saw their predicament. She couldn't write essays or books, but on this occasion at least she had more horse sense, Orton cap sense, than Emerson had. She thought of what the calf wanted, so Shep put her maternal finger in the calf's mouth and let the calf suck her finger as she gently led him into Thebarn. Every act you have ever performed since the day you were born was performed because ya wanted something. What about the time you gave a large contribution to the Red Cross? Yes, that's no exception to the rule. You gave the Red Cross the donation because you wanted to lend a helping hand. Ya wanted to do a beautiful, unselfish, divine act. Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of the semi-brethren, ye have done it unto me. If you hadn't wanted that feeling more than you wanted your money, you would not have made the contribution. Of course you might have made the contribution because you were ashamed to refuse, or because a customer asked you to do it. But one thing is certain, you made the contribution because you wanted something. Harriet Overstreet in his illuminating book Influencing Human Behavior said actions brings out of what we fundamentally desire, and the best piece of advice which can be given to be persuaders, whether in business, in the home, in the school, in politics, is first arouse in the other person an eager want. He who can do this has the whole world with him. He who cannot walks a lonely way. Andrew Carnegie, the poverty-stricken Scotchman who started the work at 2 cents an hour and finally gave away 365 million, learned early in life that the only way to influence people is to talk in terms of what the other person wants. He attended school only 4 years, yet he learned how to handle people. And to illustrate, his sister-in-law was worried sick over her 2 boys. They were at Yale. They were so busy with their own affairs that they neglected to write home and paid no attention whatever to their mother's frantic letters. Then Carnegie offered to wager $100 that he could get an answer by return mail without even asking for it. Someone called his bet, so he wrote his nephews a chatty letter mentioning casually in a postscript that he was sending each one a $5 bill. He neglected, however, to enclose the money. Back came replies by return mail, thanking dear Uncle Andrew for his kind note. And well, you can finish the sentence yourself. Another example of pursuing comes from Stan Novick of Cleveland, Ohio. A participant in our course, Stan came home from work one evening to find his youngest son Tim kicking and screaming on the living room floor. He was to start kindergarten the next day and was protesting that he would not go. Stan's normal reaction would have been to banish the child to his room and tell him he just better make up his mind to go. He had no choice but tonight. Recognizing that this would not really help Tim start kindergarten in the best frame of mind, Stan sat down and thought, if I were Tim, why would I be excited about going to kindergarten? He and his wife made a list of all the fun things Tim would do, such as finger painting, singing songs, making new friends. Then they put them into action. We all started finger painting on the kitchen table, my wife Lil, me other son Bob, and myself, all having fun. Soon Tim was peeping around the corner next. He wasped. Participate. Oh no, you have to go to kindergarten first to learn how to finger paint. With all the enthusiasm I could muster, I went through the list, talking in terms that he could understand, telling him off all the fun he would have in kindergarten. The next morning, I thought I was the first one up. I went upstairs and found Tim sitting sound asleep in the living room chair. What are you doing here? I asked. I'm waiting to go to kindergarten. I don't want to be late. The enthusiasm of our entire family had aroused and Tim Anager want that no amount of discussion or threat could possibly have accomplished. Tomorrow Yaume. Want to persuade somebody to do something before you speak? Pause and ask yourself, how can I make this person want to do it? That question will stop us from rushing into a situation heedlessly with fuel chatter about our desires. Foreign at one time, I rented the grand ballroom of a certain New York hotel for 20 nights each season in order to hold a series of lectures. At the beginning of one season, I was suddenly informed that I should have to pay almost 3 times as much rent as formerly. This news reached me after the tickets had been printed and distributed, and all announcements had been made. Naturally, I didn't want to pay the increase, but what was the use of talking to the hotel about what I wanted? They were interested only in what they wanted. So a couple of days later, I went to see the manager. I was a bit shocked when I got your letter. I said, but I don't blame you at all. If I'd your position, I should probably have written a similar letter myself. Your duty as manager of the hotel is to make all the profit possible. If you don't do that, you'll be fired, and you ought to be fired. Now let's take a piece of paper and write down the advantages and the disadvantages that will accrue to you if you insist on this increase in rent. And then I took the letterhead and ran a line through the center and headed one column advantages and the other column disadvantages. I wrote down under the head advantages these words, ballroom free, and then I went on to say you'll have the advantage of having the ballroom free to rent for dances and conventions. That's a big advantage for affairs like that. Will pay you much more than you can get for a series of lectures. If I tie your ballroom up for 20 nights during the course of the season, it's sure to mean a loss of some very profitable business to Yauno. Let's consider the disadvantages first. Instead of increasing your income from me, you're going to decrease it in fact, you're going to wipe it out because I cannot pay the rent you're asking. I shall be forced to hold these lectures at some other place. There's another disadvantage to you also. These lectures attract crowds of educated and cultured people to your hotel. That is good advertising for you, isn't it? In fact, if you spent $5,000 advertising in the newspapers, you couldn't bring as many people to look at your hotel as I can bring by these lectures. That is worth a lot to the hotel, isn't it? As I talked, I wrote these 2 disadvantages under the proper heading and handed the sheet of paper to the manager, saying, I wish you'd carefully consider both the advantages and disadvantages that are going to accrue to you, and then give me your final decision. I received a letter the next day informing me that my rent would be increased only 50% instead of 300%. Mind you, I got this reduction without saying a word about what I wanted. I talk it all the time about what the other person wanted and how he could get it. Suppose I had done the human natural thing. Suppose I had stormed into his office and said, what do you mean raising my rent 300% when you know the tickets have been printed and the announcements made? 300% ridiculous, absurd, I won't pay it. What would have happened? Then an argument would have begun to steam and boil and sputter. And you know how arguments end. Even if I had convinced him that he was wrong, his pride would have made it difficult for him to back down. And given here is one of the best bits of advice ever given about the fine art of human relationships. If there is any one secret of success, said Henry Ford, it lies in the ability to target the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own. That is so good I want to repeat it. If there is any one secret of success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own. That is so simply obvious that anyone ought to see the truth of it at a glance. Yet 90% of the people on this earth ignore it 90% of the time. An example: a look at the letters that come across your desk tomorrow morning, and you find that most of them violate this important canon of common sense. Take this one, a letter written by the head of the radio department of an advertising agency with office scattered across the continent. This letter was sent to the managers of local radio stations throughout the country. Mr. John Blank, Blankville, Indiana. Dear Mr. Blank, the XYZ company desires to retain its position in advertising agency leadership in the radio field. Who cares what your company desires? I'm worried about my own problems. The bank is foreclosing the mortgage on my house. The bugs are destroying the Hollyhock stock market. Tumbled yesterday. I missed the 8:15 this morning. I wasn't invited to the Joneses' dance last night. The doctor tells me I have high blood pressure and neuritis and dandruff. And then what happens? I come down to the office this morning worried, open my mail, and hear some little whippersnapper off in New York yapping about what his company wants. But if he only realized what sort of impression his letter makes, he would get out of the advertising business and start manufacturing sheep dip. This agency's national advertising accounts were the bulwark of the network. Our subsequent clearances of station time have kept us at the top of agencies year after year. You're big and rich and right at the top. Are you? So what? I don't give 2 hoops in Hades if you're as big as General Motors and General Electric and the general staff of the U.S. Army all combined. If you had as much sense as a half-witted hummingbird, you'd realize that I'm interested in how big I am, not how big you are. Always talk about your enormous success. Makes me feel small and unimportant. We desire to service our accounts with the last word on radio station information. You desire you unmitigated ass. I'm not interested in what do you desire or what the President of the United States desires. Let me tell you once and for all that I am interested in what I desire. And you haven't said a word about that yet in this absurd letter of yours. Will you therefore put the XYZ company on your preferred list for weekly station information, every single detail that will be useful to an agency in intelligently booking time? Preferred list. You have your nerve. You make me feel insignificant by your big talk about your company. And then you ask me to put you on a preferred list. And you don't even say please when you ask it. A prompt acknowledgement of this letter giving us your latest doings will be mutually helpful. You fool. You mail me a cheap form letter outlet scattered far and wide like the autumn leaves, and you have the gall to ask me when I'm worried about the mortgage and the hollyhocks and my blood pressure to sit down and dictate a personal note acknowledging your form letter. And you asked me to do it promptly. What do you mean promptly? Don't you know I'm just as busy as you are, or at least I like to think I am? And while we're on the subject, Ha gave you the lordly right to order me around. You say it will be mutually helpful at last. At last you have begun to see my viewpoint, but you're vague about how it will be to my advantage. Very truly yours, John Doe, Manager, Radio Department, P. S. The enclosed reprint from the Blankville Journal will be of interest to you, and you may want to broadcast it over your station. Finally, down here in the postscript, you mentioned something that may help me solve one of my problems. Why didn't you begin your letter with, "Oh, what's the use? Any advertising man who's guilty of perpetrating such drivel as you've sent me has something wrong with his medulla oblongata." You don't need a letter giving our latest doings. What you need is a quart of iodine in your thyroid gland now. If people who devote their lives to advertising and who pose as experts in the art of influencing people to buy, if they write a letter like that, what can we expect from the butcher and the baker or the auto mechanic? Here's another letter written by the superintendent of a large freight terminal to a student of this course, Edward Vermeulen. What effect did this letter have? Man told him it was addressed. Let me read it to you, and then I'll tell you. Zergas Sons Incorporated, 28 Front Street, Brooklyn, New York, 11,200. One attention, Mr. Edward Vermeulen. Gentlemen, the operations at our outbound rail receiving station are handicapped because of material percentage of the total business is delivered us in the late afternoon. This condition results in congestion over time on the part of our forces, delays to trucks, and in some cases delay. Right on November 10th, we received from your company a lot of 510 pieces, which reached here at 4:20 p.m. We solicit your cooperation toward overcoming the undesirable effects arising from late receipt of freight. May we ask that on days on which you ship the volume which was received on the above date, effort be made either to get the truck here earlier or to deliver us part of theft rate during the morning. The advantage that would accrue to you under such an arrangement would be that of more expeditious discharge of your trucks, and the assurance that your business would go forward on the date of its receipt. Very truly yours, John Brown, Superintendent. After reading this letter, Amar Vermeulen, sales manager for Azergas Sons Incorporated, sent it to me with the following comment. This letter had the reverse effect from that which was intended. The letter begins by describing the terminal's difficulties in which we're not interested. Generally speaking, our cooperation is then requested without any thought whether it would inconvenience us. And then finally in the last paragraph, the fact is mentioned that if we do cooperate, it will mean more expeditious discharge of our trucks with the assurance that our freight will go forward on the date of its receipt. In other words, that in which we are most interested is mentioned last. And the whole effect is one of raising a spirit of antagonism rather than of cooperation. Well, let's see if we can't rewrite and improve this letter. Let's not waste any time talking about our problems, as Henry Ford admonishes. Let's get the other person's point of view and see things from his or her angle, as well as from our own. Here's one way of revising the letter. It may not be the best way, but isn't it an improvement? Mr. Edward Vermeulen, care of A. Zaragoza Sons Incorporated, 28 Front Street, Brooklyn, New York, 11,201. Dear Mr. Vermeulen, your company has been one of our good customers for 14 years. Naturally, we're very grateful for your patronage and are eager to give you the speedy, efficient service you deserve. However, we regret to say that it isn't possible for us to do that when your trucks bring us a large shipment late in the afternoon, as they did on November 10th. Why? Because many other customers make late afternoon deliveries. Also, naturally, that causes congestion. That means your trucks are held up unavoidably at the pier, and sometimes even your freight is delayed. That's bad, but it can be avoided if you make your deliveries at the pier in the morning. Wempsable, your trucks will be able to keep moving. Your freight will get immediate attention, and our workers will get home early at night to enjoy a dinner of the delicious macaroni and noodles that you manufacture. Regardless of when your shipments arrive, we shall always cheerfully do all in our power to serve you promptly. You are a busy. Please don't trouble to answer this note. Yours truly, John Brown. Superintendent Barbara Anderson, who worked in the bank in New York, desired to move to Phoenix, Arizona, because of the health of her son. Using the principles she had learned in our course, she wrote the following letter to 12 banks in Phoenix. Dear sir, my 10 years of bank experience should be of interest. Rapidly growing bank like yours in various capacities and bank operations, with the Bankers Trust Company in New York, leading to my present assignment. As branch manager, I have acquired skills in all phases of banking, including depository relations, credits, loans, and administration. I will be relocating to Phoenix in May, and I am sure I can contribute to your growth and profit. I will be in Phoenix the week of April 3rd, and would appreciate the opportunity to show you how I can help your bank meet its goals. Sincerely, Barbara Anderson. Do you think Mrs. Anderson received any response from that letter? 11 of the 12 banks invited her to be interviewed, and she had a choice of which banks offered to accept. Why? Mrs. Anderson did not state what she wanted, but wrote in the letter how she could help them, and focused on their wants, not on her own. Thousands of salespeople are pounding the pavements today, tired, discouraged, and underpaid. Why? Because they're always thinking only off what they want. They don't realize that neither you or I want to buy anything. If we did, we'd go out and buy it. But both of us are eternally interested in solving our problems. And if salespeople can't show us how their services or merchandise will help us solve our problems, they won't need to sell us, we'll buy. And customers like to feel that they're buying, not being sold, yet many salespeople spend a lifetime in selling without seeing things from the customer's angle. For example, for many years I lived in Forest Hills, a little community of private homes in the center of greater New York. One day, as I was rushing to the station, I chanced to meet a real estate operator who'd bought and sold property in that area for many years. He knew Forest Hills well, so I hardly asked him whether or not my stucco house was built with metal lath or a hollow tile. He said he didn't know, told me what I already knew, that I could find out by calling the Forest Hills Garden Association. Now the following morning I received a letter from him. Did he give me the information I wanted? He could have gotten it in 60 seconds by a telephone call, but he didn't. He told me again that I could get it by telephoning, and then asked me to let him handle my insurance. He was not interested in helping me, he was interested only in helping himself. J. Howard Lucas of Birmingham, Alabama, tells how two salespeople from the same company handled the same type of situation. He reported, several years ago, I was on the management team of a small company headquartered. Near us was the district office of a large insurance company. Their agents were assigned territories, and our company was assigned to two agents whom I shall refer to as Carl and John. One morning Carl dropped by our office and casually mentioned that his company had just introduced a new life insurance policy for executives and thought we might be interested later on, and he'd get back to us when he had more information on it. The same day John saw us on the sidewalk while returning from a coffee break, and he shouted, "Hey Luke, hold up, I have some great news for you fellows." He hurried over and very excitedly told us about executive life insurance policy his company had introduced that very day. It was the same policy that Carl had casually mentioned. He wanted us to have one of the first issued. He gave us a few important facts about the coverage, and ended saying, the policy, so no, I'm going to have someone from the home office come out tomorrow and explain it now. In the meantime, let's get the application signed and on the way so we can have more information to work with. His enthusiasm aroused in us an eager want for this policy, even though we still did not have details. When they were made available to us, they confirmed John's initial understanding of the policy, and he not only sold each of us a policy, but latter doubled our coverage. Carl could have had those sales, but he made no effort to arouse in us any desire for the policies. The world is full of people who are grabbing and self-seeking, so the rare individual who selfishly tries to serve others has an enormous advantage. He has little competition. O&D Young, a noted lawyer and one of America's great business leaders, once said, people who can put themselves in the place of other people, who can understand the workings of their minds, need never worry about what the future has in store for them. If you get just one thing out of this book, an increased tendency to think always in terms of other people's point of view and see things from their angle. If you get just that one thing, it may easily prove to be one of the building blocks of your career. Looking at the other person's point of view and arousing in him an eager want for something is not to be construed as manipulating that person so that he will do something that is only for your benefit and his detriment. Each party should gain from the negotiation. In the letters to Mr. Vermeulen, both the sender and the receiver of the correspondence gained by implementing what was suggested. Both the bank and Mrs. Anderson won by her letter, in that the bank obtained a valuable employee and Mrs. Anderson a suitable job. And in the example of John's sale of insurance to Mr. Lucas, both gained through this transaction. Another example in which everybody gained through this principle of arousing an eager want comes from Michael E. Whidden of Warwick, Rhode Island, who's a territory salesman for the Shell Oil Company. Mike wanted to become the #1 salesperson in his district, but one service station was holding him back. It was run by an older man who could not be motivated to clean up his station. It was in such poor shape that sales were declining significantly. This manager would not listen to any of Mike's pleas to upgrade the station. After many exhortations and heart talks, all of which had no impact, Mike decided to invite the manager to visit the newest Shell station in his territory. The manager was so impressed by the facilities at the news station that when Mike visited him the next time, his station was cleaned up and had recorded a sales increase. This enabled Mike to reach the #1 spot in his district. All his talking and discussion hadn't helped, but by arousing an eager want in the manager, by showing him the modern station, he had accomplished his goal, and both the manager and Mike benefited. Most people go through college and learn to read Virgil and master the mysteries of calculus without ever discovering how their own minds function. For instance, I once gave a course, Ineffective Speaking, for the young college graduates who were entering the employ of the Carrier Corporation, the large air conditioner manufacturer. One of the participants wanted to persuade the others to play basketball in their free time, and this is about what he said: "I want you to come out and play basketball. I like to play basketball the last few times I've been down to the gymnasium there haven't been enough people to get up the gamut, or 3 of us got to throwing the ball around the other night, and I got a black eye. I wish all of y'all would come down tomorrow night. I want to play basketball." Did he talk about anything you want? You don't want to go to a gymnasium that no one else goes to. Do you don't care about what he wants? You don't want to get a black eye. Could he have shown you how to get the things you want by using the gymnasium more surely, more pep, keener edge to the appetite, clearer brain? Fun games, basketball to repeat. Professor Overstreet's wise advice: first arouse in the other person an eager want. Who can do this has the whole world with him. He who cannot walks a lonely way. One of the students in my training course was worried about his little boy. The child was underweight and refused to eat properly. His parents used the usual method. They scolded and nagged, "Mother wants you to eat this, and that father wants you to grow up to be a big man." Did the boy pay any attention to these pleas? Just about as much as you pay to one fleck of sand on a sandy beach. No one with a trace of horse sense would expect a child 3 years old to react to the viewpoint of a father 30 years old. Yet that was precisely what the father had expected. It was absurd. He finally saw that, so he said to himself, "What does that boy want? How can it eat up what I want to what he wants?" It was easy for the father when he started thinking about it. His boy had a tricycle that he loved to ride up and down the sidewalk. In front of the house in Brooklyn, a few doors down the street, lived a bully, a bigger boy, who would pull the little boy off his tricycle and ride it himself naturally. The little boy would run screaming to his mother, and she would have to come out and take the bully off tricycle and put her little boy on again. This happened almost every day. What did the little boy want? It didn't take a Sherlock Holmes to answer that. When his pride, his anger, his desire for a feeling of importance, all the strongest emotions in his makeup, goaded him to get revenged. Smash the bully in the nose. And when his father explained that the boy would be able to wallop the daylights out of the bigger kids someday, if he would only eat the things his mother wanted him to eat when his father permitted him, that there was no longer any problem of dietetics, that boy would have eaten spinach, sauerkraut, salt, mackerel, anything, in order to be big enough to whip the bully who had humiliated him so often. After solving that problem, the parents tackled another. The little boy had the unholy habit of wetting his bed. He slept with his grandmother. In the morning, his grandmother would wake up and feel the sheet and say, "Look, Johnny, you did it again last night." He'd say, "Well, no, I didn't do it. You did it." Scolding, spanking, shamming him, reiterating that the parents didn't want him to do it. None of these things kept the bed dry. So the parents asked, "How can we make this boy want to stop wetting his bed?" What were his wants? Or first, he wanted to wear pajamas like daddy instead of wearing a nightgown. Like grandmother, grandmother was getting fed up with his nocturnal iniquities, so she gladly offered to buy him a pair of pajamas if he'd reform. Secondly, he wanted a bed of his own. A grandma didn't object. His mother took him to a department store in Brooklyn, winked at the sales girl, and said, "Here's a little gentleman who would like to do some shopping." The sales girl made him feel important by saying, "Young man, what can I show you?" He stood a couple of inches taller and said, "I want to buy a bed for myself." When was shown the one his mother wanted him to buy, she winked at the sales girl, and the boy was persuaded to buy it. The bed was delivered the next day, and that night when father came home, the little boy ran to the door shouting, "Did Daddy come upstairs and see my bed that I bought?" The father, looking at the bed, obeyed Charles Schwab's injunction. He was hearty in his approbation and lavish in his praise. "You're not going to wet this bed, are you?" The father said, "Oh no, no, I'm not going to wet this bed." And the boy kept his promise, for his pride was involved. That was his bed. He and he alone had bought it, and he was wearing pajamas now. Like a little man, he wanted to act like a man, and he did. Another father, KT Dutchman, a telephone engineer, a student of this course, couldn't get his 3-year-old daughter to eat breakfast food. The usual scolding, pleading, coaxing methods had all ended in futility, so the parents asked themselves, how can we make her want to do it? The little girl loved to imitate her mother, to feel big and grown up, so one morning they put her on a chair and let her make the breakfast food. At just the psychological moment, father drifted into the kitchen while she was stirring the cereal, and she said, "Oh look, Daddy, I'm making the cereal this morning." She ate 2 helpings of the cereal without any coaxing because she wasn't interested in it. She had achieved a feeling of importance she had found in making the cereal, an avenue of self-expression. William Winter once remarked that self-expression is the dominant necessity of human nature. Why can't we adapt the same psychology to business dealings? When we have a brilliant idea, instead of making others think it is ours, why not let them cook and stir the idea themselves? They will then regard it as their own. They will like it, and maybe eat a couple of helpings of it. Remember, first arouse in the other person an eager want. He who can do this has the whole world with him. He who cannot walks a lonely way. Principle 3, arouse in the other person an eager want. In a nutshell, fundamental techniques in handling people. Principle 1, don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Principle 2, give honest, sincere appreciation. Principle 3, arouse in the other person an eager want. Music, applause. Part 2, 6 ways to make people like you. Chapter 1. Do this and you'll be welcome anywhere. Why? Read this book to find out how to win friends. Why not study the technique of one of the greatest winner of friends the world has ever known? Who is he? You may meet him tomorrow coming down the street. When you get within 10 feet of him, he will begin to wag his tail. If you stop and pat him, he'll almost jump out of his skin to show you how much he likes you. And you know that behind this show of affection on his part, there are no ulterior motives. He doesn't want to sell you any real estate, and he doesn't want to marry you. Did you ever stop to think that a dog is the only animal that doesn't have to work for a living? A hen has to lay eggs, a cow has to give milk, a canary has toasting, but a dog makes his living by giving you nothing but love. When I was 5 years old, my father bought a little yellow-haired pup for 50 cents. He was the light and joy of my childhood. Every afternoon about 4:30, he would sit in the front yard with his beautiful eyes staring steadfastly at the path, and as soon as he heard my voice or saw me swinging my dinner pail through the buck brush, he was off like a shot, racing breathlessly up the hill to greet me with leaps of joy and barks of sheer ecstasy. Tippy was my constant companion for 5 years. Then one tragic night, I shall never forget it, he was killed within 10 feet off my head, killed by lightning. Tippy's death was the tragedy of my boyhood. You never read a book on psychology, Tippy. You didn't need to. You knew by some divine instinct that You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. Let me repeat that you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. Yet I know. And you know people who blunder through life trying to wig-wag other people into becoming interested in them. Of course, it doesn't work. People are not interested in you. They are not interested in me, they're interested in themselves. Morning, noon, and after dinner, the New York Telephone Company made a detailed study of telephone conversations to find out which word is the most frequently used. And you've guessed it, it is the personal pronoun I. It was used 900 times in 500 telephone conversations. When you see a group photograph that you're in, whose picture do you look for first? If we merely try to impress people and get people interested in us, we will never have many true sincere friends. Real friends are not made that way. Napoleon tried it. And in his last meeting with Josephine, Hess said, Josephine, I have been as fortunate as any man ever was on this earth. And yet at this hour you are the only person in the world on whom I can rely, and historians doubt whether he could rely even on her. Alfred Adler, the famous Viennese psychologist, wrote a book entitled What Life Should Mean to You. In that book, he says it is the individual who is not interested in his fellow men who has the greatest difficulties in life, and provides the greatest injury to others. It is from among such individuals that all human failures spring. You may read scores of erudite tomes on psychology without coming across a statement more significant for you and me. Adler's statement is so rich with meaning that I'm going to torpedo it. It is the individual who is not interested in his fellow men who has the greatest difficulties in life and provides the greatest injury to others. It is from among such individuals that all human failures spring. I once took a course in short story writing at New York University, and during that course the editor of a leading magazine talked to our class. He said he could pick up any one of the dozens of stories that drifted across his desk every day, and after reading a few paragraphs he could feel whether or not the author liked people. If the author doesn't like people, he said, people won't like his or her stories. This hard-boiled editor stopped twice in the course of his talk on fiction writing and apologized for preaching a sermon. I am telling you, he said the same things your preacher would tell you, but remember, you have to be interested in people if you want to be a successful writer. Off stories. If that is true of writing fiction, you can be sure it is true of dealing with people face to face. I spent an evening in the dressing room of Howard Thurston. The last time he appeared on Broadway. Thurston was the acknowledged dean of magicians. For 40 years he had traveled all over the world time and again, creating illusions, mystifying audiences, and making people gasp with astonishment. More than 60 million people had paid admission to his show, and he had made almost $2 million in profit. I asked Mr. Thurston to tell me the secret of his success. His schooling certainly had nothing to do with it, for he ran away from home as a small boy, became a hobo, rode in box cars, slept in haystacks, begged his food from door to door, and learned to read by looking out of box cars at signs along the railway. Did he have a superior knowledge of magic? No. He told me hundreds of books had been written about legerdemain and scores of people knew as much about it as he did, but he had two things that the others didn't have. First, he had the ability to put his personality across the footlights. He was a master showman. He knew human nature. Everything he did, every gesture, every intonation of his voice, every lifting of an eyebrow had been carefully rehearsed in advance, and his actions were timed to split seconds. But in addition to that, Thurston had a genuine interest in people. He told me that magicians would look at the audience and say to themselves, well, there's a bunch of suckers out there, a bunch of hicks. I'll fool them all right. But Thurston's method was totally different. He told me that every time he went on stage, he said to himself, I'm grateful because these people come to see me. They make it possible for me to make my living in a very agreeable way. I'm going to give them the very best I possibly can, he declared. He never stepped in front of the footlights